All right, guys, today after your map test, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to start our statistics unit. And the way that we're going to start is by going over some really important vocabulary. Now, as you guys come into 6th grade, statistics is going to be some of the newest stuff that we do. You don't get a lot of exposure to that in any other grade level, so it's really super important that you have a good foundation on vocabulary before we actually start diving into the lessons. Okay, so as you finish your test, I gave you a handout. We're going to read the directions together so everybody knows exactly what to do. It says go to Google Classroom and click on the Statistics Vocabulary Online Lesson link. Obviously, you've already done that if you're watching the video. So you're going to need to put in your own headphones or borrow a pair that I have over on the counter. Fill in the blanks below as you watch the online lesson. You can rewind or pause the video at any time to fill in the blanks. So as I go over the statistics vocabulary words, there's going to be some blanks for you to fill in. Those blanks are going to be on the screen. They're going to be filled in already. So if I'm talking too fast or if you need to pause the video to get the words filled in, feel free to do that and then just press play as you resume. When you get finished, all of your vocabulary words will be filled in and you'll have this notes paper to put in your binder. Okay? All right, so the first thing that we're going to talk about is statistics. What are they? Statistics are questions with answers involving a mass or a group of numerical data or numbers. So all a statistic is it's when we collect data from other people. It's a big group of numbers. So for example, you might collect data on what is 6th graders' favorite lunch. Or we might collect data on every single height of the student in the 6th grade. We might collect data on how many students are interested in going to the dance on Friday night. Anytime that we're asking a question and then taking in information from a big group of people, we call that statistics. The next we're going to look at is variability. Variability means differences in data. When you look at the word variability, there is a root word there, vary or variety. Anytime we're talking about a variety or if we're talking about how much something varies, we're talking about how it is different than something else. When we talk about variability in a data set, we're just talking about the differences in the data. So the next one we're going to talk about is data. Data are just numbers that are used to gather information. When we think about data, a lot of times I like to think about test scores or homework scores that I get from you guys. Every single person submits a test. Everybody gets a numerical grade. Those numbers we use to gather information on your progress, on the class's progress. So we call that student data. Okay. We can use data in lots of other ways, but that's just one example. Now the next three, hopefully you've heard before. The first one we're going to talk about is median. The median is the middle number in an ordered data set. Okay, the middle number in an ordered data set. When we're driving down the road and you see that little grassy area in between the two lanes, that's called a median. Okay, it's in the middle of the highway. The median in a data set is that middle number. Now, another important piece is that it's in an ordered data set. Okay, we don't really care what the middle number is in a data set if it's not ordered. Okay, but we're talking ordered from least to greatest. That middle number is called the median. The mode is the most common data point in a data set. So it's the one that occurs the most. Mode and most both start with an MO, so that kind of makes it easy to remember. Mode is the one that occurs the most. The mean, another word for mean is average. Okay? The average of a data set is that like central number that if we were to pick one number represented the entire data set. It's the average. Sometimes we talk about a class average. So we take every student's score and we put them together, we divide by how many there are, and we get a centralized number that represents the group as a whole. the mean and the average are exactly the same thing. Okay? They are interchangeable, they are identical, they mean the same thing. So those are your 3 M's for statistics: mean, median, and mode. So mean is just the average, mode is the one that occurs the most, and median is the one that's in the middle. Okay, those are going to come in really handy starting Thursday. Okay, all right, so the next one we're going to talk about is range. Range is the variation of data points between the least and the greatest values. The variation of data points between the least and the greatest values. So when we talk about variation, we already said variability means differences. So the range is just the difference between the least and the greatest data point. Okay? So to find difference, we subtract. So all we have to do for range is to subtract the greatest and the least values, and that gives us the variation between the two. Okay? So it's just the difference between the least and greatest value. Okay. An outlier is kind of, we put 2 words together to describe what it is. So it's a data point that is far away from all of the other data points. So if you're looking at a set of data and they're all kind of clustered together, they're all kind of clumped together, but then you have one data point that is way far away from everything else, whether it's way far higher than everything else or way far lower than everything else, we call that an outlier because it lies outside of the data set. So an outlier is just any data point that is far away from all of the other data points. Okay. All right, now the next one is a biggie. Okay, when I say it, it sounds a little scary. It is mean absolute deviation. In mean absolute deviation, we abbreviate with MAD and just call it the MAD sometimes. But the mean absolute deviation is the average distance of each data point from the mean. Okay, the average distance of each data point from the mean. So really, it's not that scary. The mean absolute deviation is just talking about, on average, how far away are each data points from the average. All right, so the next one is interquartile range, another mouthful. And the interquartile range, right now, all I want you to know is that it's the difference between the upper quartile and the lower quartile. The interquartile range represents the middle 50% of a set of data. Okay, again, that might not make a whole lot of sense right now. I just want you to know that it's the difference. Okay, difference always tells us to subtract. So it's the difference between the upper quartile and the lower quartile. We'll talk more next week about what quartiles are, but just know that the interquartile range, it represents the middle 50% of the data. Okay. All right, a histogram is a new one that you might not have seen before, but it looks very similar to something you have seen before. It looks very similar to a bar graph. Okay, but a histogram are groups of data using intervals on a number line. Okay, so if you take a look at the histogram, it's only a smidge different than a bar graph. A bar graph has space in between, and it only has a single number on the bottom. A histogram represents intervals, okay, or a range. So for example, if you look right here, okay, this is the range from 10 to 12, okay, and then this one goes from 13 to 15. That's why there's no space in between, is because where one interval stops, the next one begins. So they're all tied straight together. Again, it looks a lot like a bar graph, except the bottom ranges are not one single value. Okay. All right. The next one we're going to take a look at is a box plot, or you may have heard this called a box and whisker plot. Before we learn how to make those, I just want you to know that the box plot highlights the lower quartile, the median, and the upper quartile on the number line. Okay, again, later in the week we'll talk about what quartiles are. We'll talk about how to find the median, but a box plot is just like a graphical display of these things. We just put them on a number line, and it's easy to see in that display. Okay. There's actually a box plot down here, and this is the median of the data set. Obviously, it's right there in the middle. This is your lower quartile, and then this is your upper quartile. If it has whiskers on it, it also shows us the upper and lower extremes. Okay. A dot plot is a line plot using dots to show each piece of data. This is a really simple diagram. It just uses a line, and down here we have names, okay, but sometimes it will be numbers, and it just shows us the frequency using dots. So it's kind of like a bar graph, okay, but instead of bars, they use dots. All right, so that brings us to the end of your vocabulary sheet. So now what you're going to do is you guys are going to make sure that you've filled in all of your vocabulary. And now we're just going to do some exercises with those vocabulary words, hopefully to get you guys a little bit more familiar, so that when we start statistics in a couple days, that you have a foundation with some of the vocabulary. So after you make sure that all of your blanks are filled in, what I want you to do is you're going to go back to Google Classroom, and there is a Quizlet study set of these vocabulary cards. You're going to go through just the flashcards 3 times, okay? So that means you're going to take a look at it. I would put it on the definition side and then see if you can guess the word. Just quiz yourself. Flashcards only, at least 3 times. And then after you go through those flashcards 3 times, you'll be able to play the Quizlet games with that Quizlet set, okay? All right, so if you have any questions, you come up and ask. Otherwise, other people are still taking their map test, so you still have to be at a level 0. Okay? All right, go back to Google Classroom and start with those Quizlet cards.